Well, welcome everybody to episode 80. Can't believe I'm
Wow.
saying that. Episode 80 of Circle of Fellows. Must be a milestone episode at 80, but here we are, ready to talk about executive communication today. I'm Shel Holtz. I am Senior Director of Communications at WebCorp. We're a general contractor and builder headquartered in San Francisco, and I am coming to you from the San Francisco East Bay today, and I'll be moderating an exceptional international panel of IABC fellows today to talk about this. And what I'd like to do is ask you to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to call on you clockwise as I see you on the screen, beginning with Brad.
Good day, everyone. Brad Whitworth coming to you from not too far away from Shell. I'm in Windsor, California, which is in Sonoma County. When I'm not tending to grapes in the backyard, I am doing communications work for a group called Halo that's headquartered out of Hamburg, Germany, and is an international platform for internal communication. I have a little bit of experience in the tech field, having worked for places like HP and Cisco and Hitachi and all sorts of fun places in the back. But glad to be here and be talking about exec communications.
And as a Halo customer, I'll have to say, if you go looking for it, it is Haiilo.
Yeah, so the Halo effect.
That's right. And we're going to get global now with Adrian.
Thank you for that, Shel. I'm Adrian Cropley, and I'm in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm doing the early shift today, and it's great to be with you. My background is I've been now 20 years in my practice as consulting in change and communication strategy, and also run the Center for Strategic Communication Excellence. Long time IABC. My background's been working with the executives over a number of years, working in the C-suite of organizations and advising and coaching executives. So I'm really looking forward to the topic today, and great to be with this panel.
Thank you, Adrian. And moving from Australia to the African continent, Amanda.
Good evening, everybody. And yes, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm Amanda Hamilton Atwell, and like all of us, I'm a fellow. And I have a niche consulting company for the past 22 years, Business DNA, and we do very focused communication services for all kinds of organizations, from small startups to global blue chip companies. And yes, I was recently certified as a executive coach, because I always felt that, we do these things as part of the services that we do. We deliver to companies, but I felt that I need to have some formal background on it. So I enrolled for this program, and it was very interesting, and interesting to get some formal education about it. So yes, I'm also looking forward to this, and I'm so glad that I have power, so you can properly see me.
Oh, your power's back. I'm glad to see that.
Yeah.
And circumventing the globe back to North America, Mark.
Hey there, I'm connected today from Houston, Texas. And like Amanda, I'm a certified executive coach. I made that career change, I guess you could call it, about 12 years ago after a career of consulting with Towers Perrin, and for many years, helping executives become better leaders by becoming better communicators has been a focal point. So today's topic is very, very close to my heart.
And you were at one time with Mercer. I know, because I met you when we
did. I think we had dinner. I think we went to some place in Los Angeles that when I still ate red meat, and so. That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And for those of you who are watching live, welcome. And I want to let you know that you can use the chat feature in YouTube to share your questions, your comments, your observations, I have the ability to show those on the screen, and the panel will engage around those comments and questions as they come up. But we are here to talk about executive communication. And I will start by telling you that about 4 years ago, I spoke at a conference in Washington, D.C. It was the National Speechwriters Association, or I take it was the Professional Speechwriters Association. And virtually everyone there worked in an executive communication department. And talking to them, it seemed their primary job was writing speeches for the executives at these very large organizations. Is that what executive communication is? Is it just speech writing for leaders?
Sorry, I'll jump in and say I think the leaders themselves might think that. I think it's our job to correct them in that misperception that we write speeches for them. But it is funny. Over the years, I've come across two different types of communication professional. The ones that think strategically when they're working with the executive in terms of how they can better the executives themselves to be better communicators, as Mark just said before. And then there's the ones that just love just writing stuff for them and think that that's executive communication. So I think there's a little bit of a misconception within our profession as a whole of what that role is. And our role really is to guide our executives within organizations to be better at delivering the message, how they present themselves, and how they get credibility and build trust within an organization. I think that's one of the keys.
It's funny, Shell, I spoke to that same group several years ago, and I had the same reaction. And as I've thought about it in years since, I think that when we look at the relationship that leaders have with their various stakeholders, there are the scripted moments and there are the unscripted moments. When we only focus on the scripted moments, yes, we can use the skills we have to script those moments. But I've always felt the most important counsel we can provide is for the unscripted moments, where the ways that leaders act and the ways that leaders behave and the ways that leaders spontaneously communicate can either progress the agenda that they follow or it can get right in the way. And so I feel as though we have an obligation for the leaders we work with to help them strengthen a communication sensibility, a communication radar, to know when they are or are not connecting with people. That somehow feels more important than the scripts we can create.
But don't you think the roots of executive communication really did come from that, oh my God, I've got to give the keynote address at that big customer / conference, what have you. And they needed that horsepower of, great communications people to do it. But at that point, and I think all of you have been there, it's you were that order taker. You probably didn't have a whole lot of say in whether or not that person should be at that conference and whether it was strategic or not, or whether the message was strategic. It was more, okay, we'll write you a killer speech and it's going to captivate and entertain and do all the great things, but wasn't necessarily part of that larger program that you've been describing, Mark. And it was sort of one-off things. And I think it was primarily focused on external audiences, just as media relations was a superstar place. Executive was supposed to be as well.
It seems we had somebody else who wanted to weigh in.
Yeah.
Sorry. I feel that, yes, we do write scripts and we do write speeches. And I have sympathy for these poor leaders that must, deliver all these speeches at so many conferences and at so many events. But on the other hand, if you think of the really great speeches through history, it was those speeches that the leader made, from his heart. The speech, I have a dream. I don't think a speechwriter wrote that. I don't think the speech that Churchill delivered on "This is our proudest moment" when England was down in the dumps, the speech that Mandela made the day that he came out of the prison, I don't think those were scripted. And those were the real authentic leadership speeches and the way they could address their community. Because, and I agree with Coleman and Boyatsis that says that the primal role of the leader is to move the emotions of the people. And they did that with those speeches that they made.
And I love your description, Amanda, of the role, because I think that when we help a leader understand what is the role that you play with the various stakeholders who want to follow you, that helps frame whatever communication suggestion we may offer, whether it be some words to consider for a certain moment, or whether it be how to listen for your own triggers when you're about to head down a path that will be hard to turn around from.
There's an interesting thought, though, was I'm spinning back to what Brad was saying before, is sometimes our credibility is built on how well we can write those speeches or how we can craft that communication. And I think sometimes there's a real balance as communication professionals that we have to show our craft to get the credibility and then be able to guide the leader. So I think there's a little bit of a journey sometimes, and particularly and I found this with sole communicators within organizations that are asked to do everything. And there's path to credibility and path to advisory, where you have to sometimes show the craft and be able to say, look, this is how it looks, and let me give you some credibility when you go out there and you make that speech, so that you get the runs on the board, but then you slowly coach them. I mean, Amanda, Mark, you're talking about coaching. We're all, on this call, coaches of leaders. It's what's the journey we want to take that leader on, and how are we going to craft them to get there? And sometimes we do have to rely on our craft to get that credibility.
I love that craft to credibility progression, Adrian. And I think about, most of the time when people call me to ask me to coach them, it's because they have identified, or someone else has identified, there's something in their communication toolkit that's not working. And they want to find out why. And I always feel my job is to help discover what's unique, what's special, what's endearing, what really works about this leader, and then help the leader understand what can strengthen that and what can get in the way. And I think that your comment about craft to credibility is so true, because if we didn't have the craft, we couldn't provide the coaching that they find to be so credible.
I think it also goes a step deeper than that too, Mark, because I think one of the other things that we have going for us, and another historic strength that we bring, is the content side of things. I mean, there's one thing which is all called sort of the performance art, that sort of the mega messages that are delivered and how someone is, effective. But there's also this ability to understand how to formulate the key messages, to be able to crawl inside the head of a leader and sort of extract what it is that they want to get across, and then do that thing that we do so well, which is add that creativity to it to be able to make it special. And I think the other piece that goes along well with that is this notion of it's almost like a chemistry. How effectively can that communications person pair with the top executive to have that good relationship? I've also said that sometimes it's knowing them so well that you're able to plant ideas in their head, as well as crawling inside their head and pulling the ideas out, to be able to do that content aspect in addition to the much bigger thing, because content is the gem that starts the whole presentation / speech thing, but then there's the meta package all the way around it.
Yeah, I'm interested in pursuing the coaching dimension of this a bit. Adrian and Amanda, you're both, Mark and Amanda, you're both certified coaches. I am not, but I do a lot of coaching. And I think a lot of the conversation we've had so far has presumed a leader who is interested in doing this and just wants to do it better. How do you coach a leader who is not interested in doing this? And I'm specifically thinking of somebody who has been elevated to the position despite some hardcore introversion, doesn't like working a room, is terrified to get up on a stage, doesn't even like posting on LinkedIn because there are going to be replies and comments. How do you coach somebody who, I mean, they're not resisting, they understand that it's a responsibility, but they really, really, really don't want to do this?
My approach would be to first of all have a soft discussion with the person and tell him why it is important for him to get on the stage. And I work a lot in the mining industry, and engineers do not like to get on a stage. They want to do their work and they want to sit in their office and do their work, and then they are promoted to the mine, the general manager of the mine, and then they have to speak to people. So for me, the key is to create confidence with this person, that this person feels that you want to help him, but not overrule him, that you will listen to his messages, because he was promoted because he has leadership potential. But now to convince him that as a leader, he has a responsibility towards the people in his constituency. So how will he communicate to these people and share his passion, share his ideas, share his dreams with them? And start with a small project and say, well, why don't we try this? And tell me what you want to say, and I will craft it for you. And then work on that. And if he really doesn't get it, I would work with HR and help him to do an assessment, 360 assessment. So that's how I will go about convincing him.
I'd say, Amanda, just as you're talking about this, I reflect on my own personal journey, particularly working with engineers and IT professionals that have been elevated into leadership roles, particularly at the C-suite and CEOs. And I think occasionally what I do is I take the big stick approach to them. It's actually pointing out what they don't know. Because if we look at that development journey, there's the unconscious incompetence. They don't know what they don't know. And occasionally you really just kind of have to wake them up to where their blind spots are, so that then you get an opportunity to coach them in that. And only just recently, I did my coaching certification a number of years ago, but recently I've done a certification in emotional intelligence. And I'm finding this just such a powerful tool working with people that generally lack that piece of DNA. And it's not their fault. It's just that there's a piece missing where they're actually not connecting with their people in a way that says, when I communicate in this particular way, what impact is that going to have? We talk as communication professionals the power of story and the power of narrative within organizations. And some executives, it's just so far from who they are. So showing them those examples, and I'm absolutely with you, Amanda, is you looking at those opportunities to give them that coaching. But sometimes there's that step before where you just have to get the stick out and go, right, boom, let me just show you this, or hold up the mirror and say, this is what people are seeing. And I think it takes being a little brave as a coach of executives to stand up to an executive and go, look, you suck. And let me show you the evidence that's saying your audience think you are terrible. Now, how can I help you get better at doing this?
We have comments and questions. The first, Vic Morales says, I have found it's important to remind leaders that their mic is always hot and they're constantly under the microscope, both inside and outside the company, and remind them their number one job is to inspire.
Absolutely. And I feel as a coach, my job is to help the leader himself or herself discover the communicator I want to be, the leader I want to be, and what gets me there and what gets in the way. I don't think there are any natural communicators. I don't think there are any born communicators. I don't think being an introvert is actually an impediment to being an effective communicator. In fact, many leaders I've worked with who describe themselves as introverts are the most in touch with themselves and with the people they connect with. I think it's a matter of as a leader, my being able to step away from myself and observe myself and see how I am or am not connecting with people. And as Vic said, realizing that my job here is to inspire people to follow me, and is the way I communicate helping me do my job.
I think, and to sort of build on what Adrian was saying too, I love the idea of numbers. I mean, if you can go and get data from a town hall meeting and get sort of feedback from the audiences, an employee audience, about how the executive is doing, maybe both on the content dimension and on the presentation dimension, then you're armed with something that you can go in and say, you know, the numbers just aren't as good as what they probably should be for someone. Let's figure out how to do that. And I think armed with that, you're in a much better position to be able to do it. I also think that at the same time, after the whack on the head, or if they look at numbers and buy it, there is that almost like someone who's trying to go through some sort of a rehab program, they need to want to improve. Yeah. So there has to be almost that buy-in from them. And I was fortunate one time I was interviewing the son of a CEO for a profile about dad, and talked to every member of the family. And he said, and my dad really sucked, but he also knew that he had to get better. And when he sets his mind to something, he could accomplish anything. So I think part of our job is to get them to that point where they, yep, I want to do this and help me get better.
To Vic's point that the mic is always hot, it reminds me of a famous double negative that we use in our profession, which is that you can't not communicate. You're always sending a message, whether you're intending to or not, whether you're doing something formal or not. Coaching is more than just how to present and deliver a message. I mean, communication is a two-way process. If it's just delivering a message, then you're not communicating, you're messaging. How do you coach a leader on that dimension of communication, the fact that it is multidimensional and listening is part of it?
Well, I think it begins with helping the leader himself or herself assess, when am I comfortable, when am I confident, and when am I connecting? And so there are, and I'm sure Amanda and Adrian would agree, there are many different approaches and exercises and tools and assessments that can be used to help a leader identify, when am I effective, or when do I need to work to become more effective? And certainly it begins with how I listen and how I absorb when I'm listening and how I respond when I'm listening, so that people I'm talking with believe that I'm listening and have confidence that I'm going to do something with what I hear. What I love about the open mic comment that Vic made is that every action and every bit of behavior communicates as loudly as any words that I might use. And that's where I think our being aware of the total person and how the total person connects or doesn't connect is so important, that it's not simply a matter of saying the right word, but it is the presence that someone brings to the situation.
I think, we started off this discussion with the fact that we write speeches for leaders. But in fact, I think that is a very small part of the leadership communication role that we play. I feel that the coaching, the guidance that we can give a leader when he walks the floor, how does he communicate with these people? How does he listen? How does he engage with the people, and in an authentic way? Because it's easy to walk the floor and pretend that you're there, but what must he do to be there as a leader, as somebody that listens? And if he listens, what does he do with what he hears? And I think that is the backside of our responsibility, because we can write the speech and give it to him and help him to practice it, but we can't walk with him through the whole mind. So how do we help him to be a confident, competent, connected leader there?
Amanda, I love that, and I can't count how many times that having conversations with leaders about elevator behavior, and how you have elevators are fabulous ways and times to connect with people, but if you're standing in the elevator looking at your phone, most likely you aren't engaged in eye contact with other people. Elevators, standing in line in the cafeteria, and walking to the parking lot are very important opportunities to connect. I love that. Really well
Yeah,
said.
I was doing some consulting with an organization where the executives all had lunch in the executive dining room, except for one who would come down to the cafeteria, knew the names of all of the cashiers, and then would just randomly pick a table where employees were sitting and sit with them. You can imagine that there was one executive who was beloved by the staff.
Sure.
Which leads to a question. Most of what we have been talking about seems to me to have to be external focused, audiences that you're delivering speeches to, external stakeholders. But executives, I think, have sort of stepped up their internal messaging, particularly during COVID, where there's been less face-to-face, and they've had to make a concerted effort to do Zoom all employee, all hands meetings and the like. Has this been a struggle, do you think, for executive communicators to? I have to tell you that dinner that I went to with a bunch of executive communicators at that professional speechwriters conference. Some of you know David Murray, who runs that organization, and he asked them all to go around the room and share what they thought of internal communications, and they hated it. Every single one of them had no respect for internal communicators. And here now, all of a sudden, over the last 2 years, have they been making that shift to coaching, helping these leaders communicate internally?
I mean, my work is always focused inside and outside, and not really seeing a lot of difference in certainly the communication skills and sensibility that are needed. It's always been about how do I inform, and how do I include, and how do I interact, and how do I influence, and how do I inspire, and not really seeing a difference between the two. I think that what has changed in the past couple of years is the leader's comfort with this. The leader's comfort with I'm reaching people through a little dot on my computer, and I have to be willing and comfortable revealing myself via a machine rather than sitting perhaps in a room with people.
Well, and it's also been fueled, Mark, by the fact that the external opportunities certainly had vanished, or if they were still around, they were also through a screen. So I look at, there were, in a sense, many execs, leaders were pushed into spending more time with internal audiences. And I also think that they had some really key messages that needed to be delivered to their internal constituencies, where before that was sort of like, well, somebody else can handle that. People were looking for true leaders during a challenging pandemic time on a global basis. So we forced their hand, and I think it also, many leaders learned something. I mean, many learned they don't need a briefing book before they start some sort of a meeting. Many of them learned they don't need a PowerPoint presentation to be able to have an effective reach to their internal audiences. And we learned, I think, a little bit about the human side of people who before had been a suit, who only sort of showed up on the stage, made their little talk, and disappeared back into the executive suite in worst case.
And Brad,
I think it's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think what's happened with leaders, they've been forced into connecting with their teams, with their employees in this last couple of years, and it's not an unwilling thing that they've been wanting to do. But I think what they've done is they've been able to step in there, and I think good leaders have been able to step in on this virtual platform and just listen a whole lot more to what people are feeling, how they want the stability that comes from an organization. And like, you said, Mark, I don't see a big difference between how we operate internally and externally. That wasn't always the case. It's very much moved to the relationship context now. It's very much about empathy, and it's very much around connecting with people as a whole, as the leaders have started to develop. But I think this last couple of years has given leaders the ability to listen a whole lot more, and have security that they don't actually, as you were saying, Brad, they don't actually have to have the prepared stuff. They just need to be present. They need to be a force for calm, stability. And I've seen some really great examples of some of the leaders in organizations that I've worked that have just shared their feelings and thoughts as they've traveled through the pandemic. And that relatability has increased no end. So I don't think it's been about so much the technology or the fact that we've had to do it virtually. But I think what we've done is we've created a space where leaders have been working from home. They've been in a comfortable environment. They've actually let their guard down a little bit. They've shed the suit, and they're kind of naked and online.
Well, and I love the fact that we've taken this out of the boardroom and put it into the kitchen, and that we can. My old boss was doing a company-wide address, if you will, and his son knocked on the door and said, "Dad, I need to print my science paper." And that moment of humanity probably did more to endear him to the audience than any scripted moment could. But he handled it so calmly, because we had spent time talking about what people needed to see in him. And what I think is a really positive outcome of the past couple of years is we have become more in tune to what people need from leaders to bring, just as you described, Adrian, that calm, that confidence, that sense that I'm connected. And as we coach these leaders to be aware of that, that's, I think, when we truly make the kind of difference we hope to make.
But some of them also do that naturally. I was blessed to work for an EVP who was sort of an everyday kind of guy, and he was able to strike up conversations with people. This is a person who was making enough money that he could have all sorts of people doing things, but he enjoyed mowing his yard. He enjoyed painting his house. He enjoyed changing the oil in his truck. All these sorts of things that you wouldn't think, you could have somebody else do that. And it showed when he was doing things at work. And this was at Hewlett Packard, which had the practice of management by wandering around. And I remember Dwayne one time going and sitting down at the desk of it was like a department that he just acquired, sat down, and he asked this great question that I still remember today. It's like, what are you working on? Which on the one hand is somewhat challenging. So like, you're not just sitting here screwing around on the computer playing video games, are you, or anything? But what happened was that person came to me later and said, when this guy came and sat down, I had no idea who he was. It took me a little while to find out that he was like my boss's boss's boss. He said, but this is the first time anybody in the company's ever shown an interest in what it is that I do, and how what I'm doing is connected to the higher level goals of the organization. And that he, the average employee, was going and telling stories about how this exec came and showed an interest, because that's the kind of thing that establishes the culture, establishes them a leader you can trust when it comes to some of the bigger things, if they're showing that personal interest in you as well. So I love the fact that we're talking about this it starts with this, but it's a much, much bigger field that we're trying to affect.
I'm sorry, Amanda, go ahead.
What I find very interesting is that sometimes when a new leader steps in, he has a different style. And at one university in South Africa, there was this new vice chancellor, and they had a lot of problems at this university. And he decided that he wants to listen to the students. So now, in the past, the vice chancellor was the big boss. He sat in his office and nobody ever saw him except at graduation and other formal ceremonies. So this guy he said, I want a chair under that tree, because that was where all the students would walk past. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to tell them, I want to talk to you. So you can imagine when they saw this vice chancellor sitting there, it was like, oh my goodness, what's happening here? And then one student had the courage to talk to him. And he spoke to a student and invited the student to come and talk to him. And it was interesting to see how, when he started to do this, there were very few students who would volunteer to come and talk to him. But eventually, because he did that one day, as a specific day of the week, and always a specific hours. And eventually it was like in a mass gathering, because they could talk to him, they could discuss things, they could raise issues with him. And he was incredibly clever. He responded to everything. He was so good on the social media. The students had his number, and they could send him messages. And I once asked him, where does he find time to respond to all these things? He said, when I stand in the queue at the bank or at the shop, or I stand at waiting for the traffic light. So he was incredible. But for the students to get confidence in the authenticity of this process took a while.
I coach some of the executives in my organization. I am an employee, and they know that. You coach executives in client organizations. You're coming from the outside, which leads to a question from Alice Brink, our fellow. How is the coaching challenge different for an internal expert versus an outside consultant?
So Shell, having done both and recently done both, I don't think the actual practice of coaching is all that different. I think that coaching always in its most effective form is all about a leader discovering what steps do I need to take to become more effective in this particular part of what I do. I think the difference is that the internal coach has a slightly tougher time establishing credibility, because it is more difficult sometimes for the leader to trust, knowing that we're all inside the tent together, and it becomes a little bit safer when talking with someone from the outside. So I found that getting to the conversation might be a bit more challenging on the inside. Once the conversation began, it was the same conversation.
It's interesting. I'll build on to that one, Mark, because this is almost going to be a therapy session. Because it's, as you said that, I reflected on my journey from the inside out, when I went from being the internal coach and advisor in communication to the external, and it was like a switch went on, because suddenly you were fighting internally to get heard, to be able to advise, to be able to work with the executive, and sometimes the advice was met with caution. And when I left Ericsson many years ago, and I remember my first gig as an external consultant was back at Ericsson, and it was almost like, as I said, the switch went on, because I went back into the organization. Suddenly I wasn't a different person. I wasn't offering any different advice, but they started listening. And it was because maybe they were paying a few more dollars for it, or, suddenly you've got that hat on of being the external. So I think, the expression is, familiarity breeds contempt. And I think when you're in an organization and people are very familiar with you, they tend to want to fight or push or look at it very differently to when you're external. And I found the same just recently when I was an external advisor for an organization. They asked me to go internal and work with them during the pandemic. And suddenly all of the stuff that I was giving them advice and they were listening, because I became an employee, the listening it notched down a whole lot. It was very tangible, and you could certainly see what was happening to the whole dynamic of the relationship. And I think these are the things we need to have a slightly different skill set to go, we need to reflect on ourselves, and then how do we change the way that we work with that particular organization on that particular client.
And I think the biggest change we've had to adjust to in the past couple of years is this, and I love it. I think that what a positive product of the past couple of years is how much less formal the coaching relationship has become. It used to be that you would, get dressed up and you would arrive at an office once a month and you would have a very formal discussion once a month. Now it's once a week, sometimes twice a week, and sometimes I need to talk to you right now. It is very just in time. You're much more in the moment with the people you coach, and I love it. I think it's great. I think that this crazy world we've experienced the past couple of years has created a coaching environment where people can reach for a coach at the moment that the coaching is needed. And that's positive, whether internal or external.
Yeah. What I find interesting is that I have a couple of executive coaches, but then I have coachees that's on their way. And I find it very interesting to work with them, because they still trying to find their feet as real leadership coaches, executive, rather as an executive coach, and or executive person in the company. And I find that they contact me more on, I need to do this. How do I do this? I must go into this meeting. How must I deal with this? While the executives are more structured, we have more formal arrangements with when and how, and you get the odd call, but the ones on their way up, they are more nervous. Help me now.
I would build on that too, Amanda. I've been on the advisory board of Cal State University Chico, which is a heavy engineering, math, science kind of a program. They have an executive education program that was in residence, but it was for these IT leaders or software engineers who are being thrust into management positions and need to learn. And while some of it is about some technical topics, the bulk of what it is in these classes, and certainly the theme that weaves through just about every one of these classes they're required to take to get their certificate, is communication. And it's trying to get them to, again, recognize that they need help. Sometimes someone in the organization has said, you get help and we're going to pay for it. But to participate in this and to find the key, because I think each individual, whether they're all in the same program or whether there's somebody coming in from the IT organization or somebody from finance or somebody from legal, they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. And the one advantage I was going to tell, I think Alice had a great question. What's the difference between internal and external? While external may have a little more clout because you get that professionalism in the distance, the internal, the familiarity, but you get to see people in action a little bit more frequently. So you're not just like dropping in, offering suggestions. You can watch people over time, and you probably have access to some of the audiences, and you can get some feedback on people perhaps a little bit more easily from constituents than maybe the external person who's in the moment, helping the executive, but may not have that 360 view of how effective they are in being able to pull off those changes.
I want to let everybody who is watching live know that we have about 15 minutes left. So if you have questions, comments, or observations, now is the time to share them using the chat feature on YouTube. A question that I'll throw out to all of you. Do we wait for somebody to ascend to a lofty position of, say, executive vice president before we start coaching? Or should we be privy, say, to the succession plan, understand who's on a track to reach those positions and begin working with them earlier?
Can I say, I think, I'm passionate about this topic, is coaching starts early. I think it's too late by the time you get to the executive to correct some of the behaviors or the skills of an executive. I think good organizations, and particularly big organizations around the world, have a lot of work that they put into their training and development as people are on leadership paths, and therefore the formal coaching starts early. I like to see an lots of organizations that coaching comes with training and development. I mean, I found, having a training and development organization, that coaching is often part of the deliverable for a client. It's not just going in, teaching something and then walking away. I think the coaching is the piece that says, now you've learned this, how do we put this into practice, and let's refine the skills and pop those into practice so that it becomes a behavior. So I think very early in the piece, particularly when we've identified leaders that are on that path, get in and break some of the bad habits, develop new good habits within young and up and coming leaders right the way through. And I think for people that are aiming for lofty heights in organizations is get yourself a coach or a mentor, somebody that can actually help you in that journey. I think it's the most valuable thing you can do yourself in your development.
Well, and Adrian, I think the other thing that I love in many, many corporate, I think sometimes corporations have cut back on some of their managerial executive development programs, and sometimes have even outsourced it. But to find out where these people are getting some of their training, and to make sure there's a communications component in that training, because that's not always the case. I remember having watched a management development program in action at a big company where they had somebody from finance come in and talk about the books. They had somebody from R&D come in and talk about managing a research and development program, somebody from sales, and they were missing this. There's an important skill set that ties all these things together. It's communication. So I would challenge anybody in a communications role, if there's some sort of development program for leaders, and I even say it's not just leaders, it's anybody who's in a supervisory role all the way on up, because you want to catch them, as you said, early, and find out what that program looks like and how you can inject. And it doesn't have to be a major piece, but just some sort of turn on the light bulb. Communication is going to be a critical skill set. Here's a practice session, have people enjoy it and learn, and then be wanting and asking for more. And maybe then they'll be asking for the mentor. Maybe then they'll sign up for the special class. Maybe then they'll realize I need to really bone up on that specific skill set. So get plugged into what training is taking place and make sure they're being trained in communications.
And I think because the essence of the coaching relationship is self-reflection, and you said it today, that the coach is a mirror, and realizing early on in a career that my looking in the mirror will help me see things that I need to address is really a positive step to take. And so I think this relationship, starting as early as possible, is an important investment we can make in ourselves. I coach several people who don't rely on the organization to pay what it costs. They choose for themselves to talk with a coach because it's an opportunity for them to look at themselves.
Executive communication as a function, as a profession, predates social media. Social media has certainly become an important channel for executives. Are executive coaches, executive communicators folding social media into their practices? I think it's an important topic to discuss, because we have talked about authenticity, and on social media there is an expectation of authenticity. I think when an executive is up delivering a speech, pretty much everyone knows that the executive didn't write that speech, probably worked with an executive communicator or a speech writer. But on social media, they think that's the leader, unfettered, talking from the heart. Is that something we should be coaching?
Yeah, I would agree. It is definitely something we should be coaching, and it comes back to the comment of earlier with Victor, with the mic is always on, and the thing is with social media, it's out there, and it's out there forever, and so I think there's a whole piece around coaching. I certainly build this into my practice with leaders, is remembering that every conversation that you have, every meeting, everything that is online is recorded, is shareable, is shareable forever. So it is taking the skill of the pause, the reflect, make sure that you know the outcome from what it is that you might say or do online, and then that's reflected out, which is a very powerful tool for people to show their presence out there as well. And we talk about the merging of the internal and external audience, particularly for leaders, is what you say to employees is out there. What you say externally it comes back to your employees. So every action, everything that you do is going to tell a story, and it's just amplified up when it comes to social media. It's a really important role. It's a very powerful thing for leaders to then to be able to share their opinions and thoughts around different topics. And we see now, big leaders in organizations that have become the person to follow, the person that I get my role model from. So for many people, they look at leaders that are out there very social, and saying, I like to emulate that person. They're my role model, because they're seeing them in social media, right, on a number of topics, or on a particular topic that they're being followed on. So I think it's a really important role.
And I think so much of this work, and I had to laugh, Shel, when you said that what predates social media. I mean, we all predate social media. And so I think when we look back at what this work has always involved, it's very much focused on a leader finding a voice, and that voice being consistently and authentically shared with others. That doesn't change as the media change. It still comes back to, how do the communication skills that I hopefully strengthen, how do they help me reveal who I am? So hopefully you will choose to follow what I do and the direction that I try to inspire you to take. And I don't think that has changed. I think that what has changed is that all the different ways we now have to look at leaders forces me as a leader to be so much more aware of how I'm positioning myself in every particular platform.
Well, and I think also many executive communication programs hope to establish a leader, multiple leaders in their organization, as industry thought leaders. Yeah. And if you're not using social media to help accomplish that, you're probably pushing a big rock up a big hill. Yep. So to make sure that it's a part of it, but also that authentic, and it is them who are actively doing things, as opposed to ghost writing. I'll write a whole series of tweets for you, and you go and put these up there. That ain't going to cut it. I think the other thing that we have done with social media, and certainly probably with this online in a box presentation style that we've come up with, we've trained people to be wonderfully cynical. Audiences, they will spot the differences, and they're getting much, much, much better at it. That authenticity that we're talking about, if it's not there, they spot it. If they're saying one thing to one audience and something else to another audience, our audiences spot that. And what we need to help make sure that is that consistency, and that's part of the coaching, is to get them to behave and act and say the same sorts of things, maybe in different words, maybe in different ways, but strive for that consistency across, because somebody somewhere is going to find that, hey, you can't have it both ways. You can't say this and that, unless you're a politician.
Yeah. I can fake authenticity. That's okay. Yeah. Brad, you must have been reading my mind, because my next question was going to be about thought leadership. Social media has become a key platform for thought leadership, particularly articles on LinkedIn and still blogging. Does a leader have to be a thought leader, and is thought leadership a de facto component of executive communication?
I'll offer a comment there around, I don't think they do. For some, that works really well, is being out there and being the thought leader, and that's part of maybe the company's positioning or the company's branding. But I think for leaders, the key is this authenticity in whatever platform that they are on. But I don't think it builds anything great to be a thought leader on a particular topic, because sometimes that can come across as being arrogant or being
preachy.
Yes, exactly. So self-indulgent. I think there's a bit of a motive around this, and what is that all about? Because if you're interested in something else and you're interested in a particular topic, or you want to be seen for that topic, are you really being a leader and connecting with your people and your employees, or is that the topic that you're on? So I'm kind of a little bit on the fence, but I really don't think that that's part of the mix that is essential for a leader. I think authenticity and being seen as a person is.
Right. I totally agree, Adrian. And I think that as coaches, if there's any ultimate job we have, it's to help leaders stand in their truth. I once had a boss who had a favorite expression: start with the truth and then edit. And I think that occurs when we're talking about the words we create, but it also is quite important when we're talking about the people we coach, and our using the skills we have to help people stand in their truth, to articulate their truth, and to take that truth to whoever is most important to their advancing whatever sense of mission they have. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up here, we have just a couple of minutes. Early in the conversation, we were talking about storytelling and narrative. To Vic's point, the number one job is to inspire. And I think it was you, Adrian, who said what we're trying to inspire them to do is join us on this journey that our organization is on. Don't you want to be part of this, which is the role of a strategic narrative? Can a leader be taught to tell good stories, or is that just something that comes naturally and you need to find another way to have leaders who aren't natural storytellers do that part of their job?
Shell, sorry.
Amanda, go ahead.
I have, in my processing, I use storytelling a lot, and I find it very easy to convince even the most hard-nosed engineer to start telling stories just by taking them back to the stories that they grew up with and the impact that had, and to help them to understand that they can use the same technique and tell the story of the company. So yes, storytelling is an important skill to share and to build with these people.
And I'd add to that it is a teachable skill, because it's demystifying what story is about. The minute you mention you're telling a story or sharing a narrative or whatever, we're already couching it in something that sounds a little bit more complex, and people go, oh no, I'm not a good storyteller. It's actually just kind of breaking down those barriers and going, as Amanda said, just share something that you're passionate about or something that you're really familiar with, and just have a conversation. Because sharing a story is often about just having a conversation with somebody, just talking about something that's passionate to you. And I found working with leaders, it's find a familiar story and use the same principles as it becomes more complex. So make everything that is maybe complex in an organization, break it down to something that's familiar to you and is very relatable to others. So go through a lot of that skill training with leaders, and most leaders, whether they're introverts, extroverts, technical or non-technical, they tend to grasp the idea that everybody can tell a story to different degrees, but can do that skill.
And that takes us to the end of our hour. I have just enough time to let you know what's coming up next month on episode 81 of Circle of Fellows, which will take place at noon Eastern time, back to our regular schedule. on Thursday, May 19th. The topic is research and measurement, as it relates, of course, to communication. And the panel will include another fellow from the African continent, Stephanie Griffiths, along with Mary Hills, Jim Schaefer, and Angela Sinicus, all highly qualified to talk about measurement and research. I want to thank each of you for your insights. This has been a very fast hour, and I think it's been great. So I really appreciate your participation.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks so
conversation.
much. See you.